All right. Hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar, Start Here, Building a Digital Fundraising Program. We are going to talk today about how you can select tools and solutions and then also design and implement a strategy for your new digital fundraising program. So if you signed up for this webinar and you're here, then you're in the right place. We're very excited that you have joined us. We are recording this webinar and we will share the slides afterward. We'll send them out via email and also post them on our website. So if you see a lot of great information that you don't want to forget, then don't worry, you'll receive a soft hard copy of the webinar afterwards. Before we begin with today's content, we did want to say this webinar was originally scheduled for last week, and our two companies mutually decided that last week was not the right time for the webinar, and we decided to postpone. I'll say, while we aren't 100% sure that now is the right time either, we do want to make sure that nonprofits that are doing good work and have a need to implement a digital fundraising program can get access to information that we're going to share with you today. We also put out this joint statement that we are all doing our part. We are committed to doing our part to fight for racial equality, to dismantle systemic racism, to educate ourselves, and to listen and behave with compassion and understanding. We also resolve to use our voices and talents to support the movement, both personally and professionally. So, you know, we do want to unequivocally say, Black Lives Matter. So here's our agenda today. We are going to welcome you all first, and then we'll introduce ourselves. And then we'll briefly state, not really, I guess, the problem, but sort of the opportunity. Why are we here today? It's because maybe we need some digital now. And then Raise Heck is going to talk to you about selecting solutions. Media Cause is going to you will bring a lot of questions to you. I will also say, if you do have questions, you can post them in the chat as we go along. One of us will monitor and answer them in the chat if we're able. And if it's a specific question for the presenter, then we may choose to pipe up and ask the question. We'll also have a separate question and answer free-flowing exchange of ideas at the end of the webinar. So, first of all, welcome, and thank you for deciding to spend some of your day with us today. We're very pleased, especially with the rescheduling. So my name is Sally Heaven. I'm a principal and one of the co-founders of Raise Heck, and I've spent almost the entirety of my career in nonprofit advocacy, fundraising, and technology. And I started my career in this space in 1999. So 21 years later, I've seen an incredible evolution of tools. The space has evolved incredibly rapidly. And, you know, I'm really kind of proud of the industry as a whole that digital tools are playing a role in helping us all reach tipping points much faster for all of the causes that we all care so much about. So that's me. Charlotte, could you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Charlotte Cressy. I have spent my career in the nonprofit space. I've managed digital marketing and advocacy programs, as well as prior to starting Raise Hack, I worked in customer success for a leading nonprofit software provider. Sally will talk a little bit about who we are, but you know, we started Raise Hack to really combine those two passions for nonprofit digital technology and ensure that nonprofits like you guys are getting the most out of the software that you invest in.
All right, how about Nicola?
Hi, I'm Nicola Leckie. I'm a Media Cause on the fundraising team. I've been in nonprofits for about 10 or so years on the for-profit analytics side before that, and started out in for-profits at Cornell Lab of Ornithology, really in the beginning of their digital program, a lot of lead gen and fundraising and membership program, individual giving. So excited to be here today. And over to Dan.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dan Reed. I'm a senior contractor at MediaCause. Prior to MediaCause, I worked in the nonprofit space, and I've been in the nonprofit space broadly for 14 years. But specifically, I worked in international relief at a brick and mortar cultural and art institution, as well as a smaller nonprofit that was centered around men's health. So I feel I'm excited to talk today and also listen to what you all have to ask and say. I'm curious about your own, missions and efforts that you have already. So we'll be excited to dive in.
Fantastic. Thank you all. So why are we here today? I'd like to start by saying the original concept for this webinar was conceived because of the global COVID-19 pandemic. We were seeing nonprofits having some of their fundraising channels curtailed, and then an overall, not for every nonprofit, but maybe more on average across the board, revenue and donations were somewhat depressed or distressed. In specific, a lot of face-to-face fundraising channels stalled. And so that includes things like door-to-door canvassing or street canvassing, peer-to-peer events, and then also gala events for fundraising. So what do you do when maybe your grant money is drying up or donations are down? Perhaps you can turn to digital to try and make up for some of that revenue to keep things going. Now, as well, in the last couple of weeks, the demonstrations in response to the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and so many other people, the demonstrations in support of Black Lives Matter and against police brutality have shown the immediacy of the digital channel and digital tools. If you're like me, you've been glued to your phone looking at videos and, probably horrified by what you saw. They're hard to watch, but they're important to watch because they illustrate the problem much better than any op-ed, essay, or email can. So whether or not your mission translates to in-person demonstrations, digital can help bring this immediacy to your mission as well. Digital is also nimble and flexible, so when the news changes, you can either get a response out or you can lead the change through a digital channel. It's much easier to do that than through direct mail or telemarketing. And then finally, when we talk about digital, mainly I think we are talking about outbound efforts. And so that means contacting people through email or social media. And then inbound is more like if you have a website and then you put up a new statement, then people need to go to your website somehow. So maybe you have some really dedicated supporters who go there every day, but by and large, to get eyes on your content, you need to drive it there. And so a digital program and tools will help you do that. So hopefully you're here today because you would like to invest more in digital and you're seeking guidance for how to get started and how to go about it. So we're going to talk today about whether your organization has a solution. And when I say solution, I don't mean whether you are subscribing to software as a whole. I mean, do you have a holistic suite of tools that your organization all can use, has access to, that all feed data back into a central location? And that's whether it's one combined solution or a best of breed with several different tools approach as well. So we're going to talk about that. If you just have a pile of tools, how can you turn that into a solution or decide to find a new one? We're also going to talk about whether or not you have a strategy or just ad hoc messaging. Do people in different departments and programs send out messages when they need to get something done without really knowing what everybody else is doing in the space, or is everyone meeting so your organization speaks with one cohesive voice and you make sure that you're not hitting the same supporter 3 or 4 times in one day from different programs? So that's another thing we'll touch on. The underlying principle here is that whatever your strategy is, whether you have one or not, and whether you're going to take time to figure out what your strategy is, that should drive your solution. So Charlotte will talk more about this when she talks about the process for selecting tools. So Raise Heck, that's our name, Charlotte and me. Why do we exist? Charlotte and I decided to create this company because we want to help nonprofits who are making the world a better place. We want to help them find and use the best tools for their mission in the best way. Depending on what your mission is, different tools might be, you might prefer or you might benefit from different tools than the nonprofit next door or down the street. We don't want technology to be an impediment to your success in getting the word out about your mission. We can help fast track you to selecting your ideal solution, and we can also make sure that you're set up to use it well. So at this point, we are going to hear from my colleague, Charlotte Cressy. And Charlotte, it looks like you're muted, perhaps by design, but you should unmute.
Sorry about that, everyone. Of course, I had to be the one to do that. So thanks, everyone. Welcome. We're super excited to be here, as Sally said. I'm going to kind of talk through what specifically Raise Heck is going to talk about. So as Sally just mentioned, now is the time to reevaluate your fundraising programs. But if you're going to reevaluate your fundraising programs, especially with digital fundraising, you also need to look at your technology to determine if your systems are meeting or able to meet your requirements and goals. So we'll walk you through how to do that. So what we're going to cover is a self-assessment. So looking at what you currently have, what your technology needs are, and this will allow you to be informed as to whether or not it makes sense to invest in new technology or just use better what you currently have. We'll walk you through how to prioritize your requirements based on your self-assessment. And then if you determine that it's time to look for something new, then we'll give you some tips and some as to how to get started. Sorry. All right. So the first thing is the self-assessment. That's really kind of where you need to begin. So you'll begin by determining what your specific goals and objectives are, at this time. So what programs do you want to focus on? Is it email marketing? Is it online advertising, growing your sustainer file, et cetera? There's a lot of different areas that you could potentially pursue, but really drilling down as to what are your priorities. Nicola and Dan are going to walk you through some of these strategies in more detail, but you'll need to use your unique goals and objectives to self-assess your technology and see if it's meeting your requirements. So once you've done that, you'll take a look at what you're currently using. So put together a really high level, basic list of what your organization has right now. And this will include the name of the solution, the cost, who owns the relationship with the provider, and what staff are currently using it. We've seen that there's some organizations who a certain department or team may purchase a solution for a particular need, and other departments aren't using it at all, and so you're not aware of what exists. So this is a good opportunity to say, as an organization, take stock of what exists and potentially start using it better. Then you'll kind of look at, drill down a little bit further. So who's using this software, and an inventory of staffing. Put together the detail of where you map your goals and objectives that you determined initially, how they meet to what your software is. So you want to think here about shorter term and longer term goals. And we know it's kind of difficult right now to think about longer term. But if, for example, you're an organization that was reliant on events and you're trying to pivot to virtual events, maybe that's something that you're going to want to pursue as a longer term strategy for your organization. It's important here to consider, your back office, so what teams, who are they using it, as well as your supporters. So then we kind of look at the final phase of the self-assessment is looking at an inventory of success. So how's it working for us? Create a list of pain points or issues, and then also thinking about what works well. It's important during this stage not to rely on just one individual's response. Maybe you have somebody who's working in it who's very frustrated in the solution, but it's working well for others. So really looking at everybody who could be who's using the solution. So from your most junior staff to senior leadership. Some ways to do that are you could create a survey. You could or get together, not in person, but over Zoom, and have like a meeting and kind of hashing it out together about what's working for the organization and what's not. So finally, after you've got your self-assessment together, you should be able to determine if a new system will really address the items on your list. So for example, if your original, your goals and your new priorities are that you really want to focus on increasing your email marketing. Maybe you've been sending out emails, but you haven't really been, had a fuller, more engaged, robust strategy in place. And so you want to look at, your requirements that you want to focus more on marketing automation, or do you want to make sure you have a solution that's easy to use, which is really important for your staff. Maybe you want access to more data and reports. If your current system that you're using actually does have all of these, it's able to perform those functions, then maybe you don't need to invest in a new solution at this time. What you need to do is to look at, additional training or adoption, or potentially looking at staffing. But it's not time to go shopping. If it doesn't meet your key requirements, then it is time to look at other solutions that can meet your goals and objectives. And it is time to go shopping. So now is the time to then think about prioritizing the requirements and lists that you had put together from your self-assessment, and really start drilling down from there. Not every tool is going to have everything, but if you capture and identify your top requirements, you're well on your way to kind of achieving your goals. So it's important really to be laser focused on what are your key requirements. Some solutions may have a new fancy bell or whistle, a new fancy feature that they're trying to promote, but you had not considered before. And a savvy salesperson tries to convince you that you actually do need that. Don't let that drive your decision making. It's about finding a new solution that matches your requirements and your budget and your staffing. Speaking of, it's really important for you to keep in mind your budget and know what that is up front. And you have to think not only of what it's going to cost in the monthly subscription fees, but it's important to consider additional support needs as well. And your budget has to also encompass your people. Do you have the right people on staff? Will training and investing in the training be what you need to get your staff on board with this new solution? Or do you need to consider that you need additional people to work on the new technology, some additional skill sets? Because really, if you're going to make an investment in new technology, the technology is only as good as the people who are going to be using it. All right, so you've done the hard work. You're ready to get out there and find a new solution. But where do you start? So there's a lot of great resources that are out there. We provided a few of these, and as Sally said, we'll get the deck and you have access to all of these links. We wanted to kind of just provide you with a few different resources. One specific guide that we've seen recently published by some friends of ours at the Firefly Partners is their guide to nonprofit digital marketing tools. It's a great resource. And I think Sally's also going to be posting it in the chat. N10, if you're not already familiar with them, you should be, the Nonprofit Technology and Education Network. They have several resources and various topics, but this is a good resource here. And then finally, it's not too early to start thinking about how do you adopt your new technology if you are going to be pursuing it. And we published a guide in partnership with Every Action that will help you prepare to use your new solution, whatever it may be. So how do you decide? Just to kind of wrap it up from my end is really let your prioritized requirements be your guide. Don't get distracted by the bright, shiny object syndrome. You put work into this. You did your self-assessment. You established your list of requirements and you prioritize them. So really stick to that. Additionally, keep your budget in mind. Don't forget about that. Stick to it. And be aware that whatever tool you select, there may be additional costs in staffing or consulting or other areas that you've got to make sure that you're factoring in. And finally, take advantage of this, this great network that we have within the nonprofit community. lean on your friends and peers and see what others are using and get that feedback. You can get some real candid feedback that way. Ask them what they love about the features and functionality and what they hate. And that is it for me. So I'm going to turn it over to Dan. Dan?
All right, I think, Charlotte, you may need to stop sharing before Dan is able to start.
Sorry. I'm not even sure how to do that.
If you look, if you hit escape, oh, did you find it? There you go.
Okay, can everyone see my screen and hear me, I hope?
Yes.
Great, thank you, Sally. So yeah, we're gonna talk through a few different items today, and obviously all related to what's been happening recently in the context of the pandemic, but also certainly in the context of jumpstarting your digital fundraising, and or pivoting your sort of traditional offline channels and efforts to digital. So at a high level, we're going to talk a little bit about audiences, digital audiences in particular, their definitions and applications, as well as a little bit generally about data measurement and its importance. And then we're going to dive more deeply into what we're calling finding your footing in challenging times. And we'll talk a little bit specifically around some strategies and ideas to tease out in the current climate of things. And then lastly, we'll kind of pan back out and we'll talk a little bit more about best practice in the context of strategy. We'll talk about it within the context of the top of the funnel and the bottom of the funnel, the conversion point at the donor journey. So with that said, I first wanted to provide a little bit of context. So this chart on the right shows total giving as a percentage of GDP from 1975 through 2015. And the key takeaway here for us is that although giving has increased in current dollars since 1977 with a few exceptions, total giving as a percentage of US GDP is generally flat at 2% or so. And so when we think about the fact that we're currently in an official recession, I think it's important for organizations to think about what their organization does and how they fit into the broader philanthropic community. So these two charts illustrate that point a little bit further. So what you see here on the left is the total US giving from 1969 through 2011. And you'll notice the gray recession years are grayed out, those gray columns, and you'll see the broad dip when those recession years happen. But you'll notice in those same recession years, most recently in 2007 through 2009, you saw an increase in the total food bank donations. And we're seeing a little bit of that same story today. And I think it tells an interesting point on the sort of fluidity of donor priorities. This is a chart from 2016 from Fidelity Charitable. And I think it's an important illustration of how fluid donor priorities are. And I think what's interesting for us in this particular moment in time, which is on top of the pandemic, the general social unrest and happening in our country right now, various causes are sort of flip-flopping around and receiving attention. And so I think it's important for you to understand in the context of your own organization where your cause might sit. To that end, this is what would be called a pest analysis, and this is kind of doing another self-assessment, so to speak, but this is looking more externally in addition to the technology factors, but also the other factors at large that could affect your ability to fundraise. And I think it's important for us to understand that now in 2020 with everything that's happening too. So as far as the general, how you might want to think about strategy is important, maybe is a good point to take a step back as an organization and understand where you fit into the broader conversation. But generally though, I think we can dive right into our original agenda, which was around audience segmentation. So here, this slide illustrates basically the wide breadth of audiences that are there in the internet, so to speak. But I think my point that I wanted to make sure was heard was that your audiences don't sit on your email file. They don't live on Facebook. They are living in the world, and they interact with you on these channels. And I think when we think about meeting donors where they are as a traditional best practice of philanthropy, I think it's important in the context of how you might consider your targeting as far as meeting donors where they are in the moment in time and place on that particular channel. It's an important general point so that we can think about segmenting. And the reason we want to do a lot of segmentation, we'll talk a little bit more specifically around what you would do within various segments, but typically it's so that you can send the right message at the right time in the right place, so that you can measure performance among different cohorts, so that you can automate best practice, so that you can test tactics within a like audience and inform future decision making, so that you can suppress people appropriately, and that you can, above all, move donors through their life cycle and drive the highest possible LTV. Onto data measurement. So I did want to make another sort of best practice point on data measurement. And I promise maybe the more boring slides are at the beginning. But I wanted to spell out the sort of general best practice types of reporting that you might want to put in place once your digital program is up and running. And these fall into three types: financial/accounting, performance measurement, and behavior measurement. So each one of those reports we would like to see three different views for each one of those reports. So you'd have a short-term view, a mid-term view that's month-to-month or campaign-based, and then a longer-term view when you're looking at quarterly or annually ROI typically. And the reason we want to have these types of reports in place and with these views in place is so that we can report to finance accurately and transparently, so that we can honor donor intent, so that we can speak to people appropriately, and so that we can make short, mid, and long-term decisions, such as future investments, responsibly based on data and facts. And then above all, so that we can raise more money and more effectively move our missions forward faster. So with those sort of broad strategy points, I want to dive a little bit more deeply into what we're talking about today, at least in the context of our daily lives, but finding your footing during challenging times. So one point on messaging, regardless of your cause, we're of the opinion that you don't stop fundraising. We think it's broadly more important to think even more about tonality and being transparent. And one way to sort of always make sure that you do this is to continually focus on your own mission and thinking about how it basically just driving your decision making out of that sort of construct. Within the messaging framework, though, we would of course want to apply hyper segmentation strategies, and that's multifold. I think for the generally you would want to do a large amount of segmentation, but I think in the context of a recession and where we are in the country, it's important for us to think through other segments beyond just the traditional monthly donor and multi-year, your traditional segments, but thinking about geographic segments, particularly coming up within the hurricane season as we think about the Gulf Coast and such, as far as how you might think about segmentation. But on the right, I wanted to sort of give a shout to, this is the Smithsonian National Zoo. And so the other day, I thought they did a really nice job of sort of speaking from a place of strength as far as their mission is concerned, and then also keeping it focused on what they were wanting to do in that particular day, which was to highlight National Amphibian Week. But I thought they did a really nice job of spelling out why they're not leading with that, and they wanted to talk about what they did talk about. So that kind of did a nice job of essentially leading with empathy, right? So it's not about you. The point here is that they did a good job of meeting the donors and their file where they were at that particular moment in time. Like, and they did it from a place of focusing on their mission. I think that was really well done. So thinking about your own case for support, there are a few different frames or questions perhaps to ask about how you might sort of frame your own case for support for your own mission now that we're in a lockdown, so to speak, still, or certainly in this pandemic. Of course, are you directly responding to the crisis, and if so, how? If not, how has your organization addressed continuity of services, or what are the increased costs related to that? Will there be a budget shortfall? And if so, how will that affect your mission and specific programmatic outcomes? How critical is your mission right now, and what or who is at risk? And why would it be important that your organization be sustained through this crisis? And if you can answer that specifically. So on the right, I think were another couple of good examples of how some organizations are framing their mission. I think if you look at the example on the far right, I thought they did a nice job of COVID-19 complicates the work, but St. Jude has not wavered in its commitment to kids everywhere. They said it complicates the work. I think that was just a nice way of talking about how they are approaching things. On the middle example here, this is an e-renewal from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And so this sits as a boilerplate copy above the fold, where they do give a call out to not only the difficult times, but also how their gift could be, or their donation might be wanted to be used elsewhere. So I think that was a nice sort of call out again to meet the donor where they were and where they are at that moment in time. Generally, though, to look through wanting to know your segmentation strategy, typically you'd want to prioritize your segmentation around these 5 areas, which is recency, frequency, the value, propensity, and capacity. So with those are your typical general frames for segmentation, and we continue to advise this for our clients. But let's look a little bit more deeply here at some of these specific segmentation strategies. So one group, particularly now, to think about that maybe you have overlooked would be your volunteers. This is an opportunity to bring this group into the unique problem that your organization might have to be solving for. And then in the process could create a sense of ownership for that particular group. So beyond, of course, your board members, but also to lump into that your program volunteers and also your fundraisers. The monthly donors is another group. If you have monthly donors on file, they theoretically are some of your core best group of donors. And so thinking about them as a potential group to solicit in this time might be a good idea if you have typically suppressed them from appeals, wanting to do no harm. But similarly, I would add that they might also be a group to tap as a volunteer type group, where you can ask to, you know that they commit monthly, and it might be an opportunity to ask further if they can perhaps help you fundraise, or at least help you out in some other area that could be beneficial. Another point to make is to consider, focusing on donor stewardship, in particular for your MVPs. So as I was alluding to, talking about earlier, was this notion of deep segmentation. And so thinking about your core longstanding supporters, those multi-year sustainers, your mid-level, your major donors, and how you would invest differently. And so I think a good example perhaps is here with when you want to widen your outreach pool. So for example, if your CEO typically only calls donors who give 10K or up as part of that enhanced stewardship strategy that you might already have in place, because it's a recession, you might want to consider lowering that threshold to 1,000. And so as an example with the CEO, there might be a number of other ideas or people to think about as far as who you might tap to be stewards of your donors. And then just another point too, to proactively reach out to your donors and ask just how they're doing. Particularly now, I think that's a general good idea always, but certainly these days. And then another idea here to talk through would be to consider expanding the definition of MVP. I kind of talked a little bit about that, but expanding your VIP in-person event to a larger audience. That might seem like, you probably folks have heard a lot about those kinds of ideas already. On the right, this is an example of a client of ours that's doing an at-home event. And what is nice about this particular event is that they, instead of having a required cost per ticket, they've asked for a suggested donation amount. And so with that in mind, there's an expectation that that will actually go farther than the original event would have brought in the first place. So we're excited about that one. The other idea too, and I think this is another one that there might be a lot of opportunity because of the unique nature of this pandemic where folks are essentially locked in, but your program staff theoretically are available, maybe a little bit more available to get on the phone or maybe get on a different kind of channel like a Zoom call to talk to your donors and supporters or select group of them. It's an opportunity to perhaps present new voices to your file as you bring them, move them along in their life, in their donor cycle. And so just a couple of examples that I liked on the right. Webinars, of course, a great idea, but I also think it's a nice opportunity to try different channels that maybe might not have been more widely used by your organization before. And I would also add one final point here on presenting new voices or using new channels or less common channels would be to lean into the nature that some things you might be able to get away with things being a little bit more homespun as an organization. I think it actually lends itself to being a little bit more transparent. So to that end, not having to have a really polished product out in market at this point in time, I think is an opportunity to try new things. Then I'm going to turn it over to Nicola to talk a little bit about the top of the funnel.
Great, thanks, Dan. Yeah, so top of the funnel best practices, unless you're one of the organizations who's really tied into the food banks or things that are going on right now, you're probably going to want to shift your media spend from acquisition efforts to more of your warmer leads. So we definitely think, supporting search is a place that you do not want to cut, but making sure your keywords and ad strategy are robust and really taking more advantage of the warm leads. And we'll talk about that a little bit more on the next slide. But also it's an opportunity to dive into the keyword rich landing pages and make sure that you've got relevant content on your website and donation forms to bring more people in, especially if you're just starting a digital program and may have a smaller list of emails. Think about lead generating content. Make sure your e-news sign up is prominent on your website to help build your email audience, and offer some fun pledges or petitions or even quizzes. People are home right now looking for things to do. We are seeing a shift in people from using from mobile to desktop. So mobile optimization is always really important, but right now if it's not perfect on mobile, then it's okay, because we are seeing that shift to desktop right now since everybody's home with their laptops and working. But think about ways to build your email list and what you can offer content downloads to really pull people in, because they're already getting to your site. And then as far as media spends go, we've provided a sample budget here and how we would break it up, and it's really prioritizing those warmer leads first. So we focus on Google Ads and paid search, people that are searching your organization name. Continue to invest there, offer them easy access to your donation form and matching campaigns if that's relevant and that's something you can offer. And Facebook and Instagram really offer a lot of nice targeting options, especially around retargeting website visitors and lookalike audiences. So this would be the second place we'd prioritize that media spend if you have some. And then finally, kind of your Google Display Network, it provides a great option to stay top of mind in the people who are visiting your site, retarget them through Google Display Network to make sure that you're taking advantage of that search and people who are already know who you are. And these next couple of slides just dig into those a little bit more. So we've got Google search. You know, it allows you to target people who are ready to give. So if they're searching for your organization name, then you know, definitely want to get them to a donation form. And if you have the match again, here is a good place to leverage that and spend the bulk of your budget on this type of effort. And then yeah, Facebook and Instagram again, you're retargeting, and really you can do some powerful targeting here, setting up lookalike lists on the email list or donors you already have. And then also retargeting those people who've been on your website and, you know, have some familiarity with you. And then Google Display Network as the third one here, just continuing to, you know, stay top of mind and for the people who are, you know, getting on that web list, but, you know, make sure that you're also thinking about how to capture them once they get to your site too. So all the way through the funnel. And that would bring us into the next section 2 about the donation form. We don't want to forget the donation form. It's very important that good stat here, the average website donation form, 4 out of 5 people who land on there do not make a gift. So we really want to focus on that user experience, make sure it's easy to make a gift, become a member, become a sustainer, and use some, you know, show your credentials and make sure the copy there makes sense. So here are some good examples: trustworthy organization and secure transaction. Like, use these trust seals and show that you that it is a secure process. Let your donors know that they can trust you, and show the credentials that you've earned here, so that they just be transparent. We also like this example because it shows, you know, $120 can provide tarps to protect 8 family shelters from the weather. And then again, kind of reinforces this. Most people are giving at the $120 level. So it really gives confidence in that your gift is making a direct impact. And also, you know, talks about what other people are giving, to, so people know, oh, okay, this makes sense. But make sure the copy, you know, is emotive and it really speaks to your audience. Dan's going to show. There you are. Are you on mute?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry.
Okay.
I'm not sure if folks can hear that, but I just wanted to, this is our last slide, and hopefully you can hear this video, but at least see it. I would say maybe one tip would be the thank you page itself can be a really powerful opportunity to make that donor journey feel really good. And I think it's one of those pages that we find to be too transactional. And one of the immediate edits that we like to make is to try and make this more emotive and beyond transactional. Certainly should have a receipt, but you want it to be more strategic. So again, don't forget about every step along the way, along the donor journey. It's just another opportunity to engage.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Dan and Nicola, for that. I learned a lot. I was actually very, it makes sense, but I was so surprised to hear that desktop is up, and it makes total sense why. So thanks for sharing that information with us. We have come now, also in case people couldn't hear the audio of the video, what we'll do is we'll send a link out to that video directly after the webinar for you. So now, what we would like to do is questions and answers. So we're going to invite you to ask your questions in whatever way you would like to do. Let me just try and project this. Our slide here says use Zoom to raise your hand, which I think you have to go hunting for a couple of clicks to find that. If you want to ask a question live, actually, just feel free to unmute yourself and turn your video on if you'd like and ask your question. You can also type your question in the chat and we'll monitor the chat for your questions. So who's got a question? I'm also having trouble seeing, seeing the chat. So is anyone else, Charlotte, are you, and Nicola, are you guys able to see if there are any questions in the chat?
I do see the chat and there are no questions. Oh,
All right.
Have folks found Google Grants for advertising a useful tool for recruitment? I would say yes, I have. I think it kind of goes back to that lead gen discussion too. Like really dig into your Google Analytics right now. What is bringing people to your site, and then making sure when people get there, that those pages that are bringing people in right now have some prominent e-news sign up opportunities on it, even if it's just an email sign up or if it's a lead magnet to get people to provide their email address. But then kind of the next step, you want to make sure that your workflow, you're nurturing them and teaching them more about your cause and taking them along the journey to fill them in. But let me know if you have a follow-up question, Tom. I think it's definitely, we want to make sure that you're taking advantage of those Google grants.
And this is Dan. Tom, thanks for that question. To add to piggyback on that, I would see that your ad grant as a fundamental piece of your digital efforts, and I think it goes a long way as far as SEO is concerned. But as far as like the grant itself, it counts towards in-kind corporate on your finances, and so in that respect, there's an incentive to make sure that you can spend. So you're granted $10,000 a month by Google, and it's just up to the org to spend.
Well, I have a follow-up question to Tom's question, if I may, for you, Nicola and Dan. So Dan, back before this pandemic happened, you and I met for coffee, and you said something that has stuck in my brain ever since, which is,
sorry,
in a good way, that most people begin their experience on the internet in search, even if they think they're typing out a URL. What they're actually doing by typing into the address bar is engaging in a search. So does digital advertising and then SEO, those are different things, obviously, but I'm curious about the difference between actions an organization can take to increase their Google rank, so their website shows up higher when somebody Googles something, versus investing in online advertising that may show up off to the side when somebody searches for specific keywords.
Maybe I was gonna. That's a good question. I think my feeling would be, as far as the spending and the grant and search is concerned, typically it depends on search volume. So like if your organization doesn't enjoy, unfortunately, a large search volume, you theoretically could get away with spending in the grant, using the grant dollars rather to spend as much as you actually needed in terms of supplemental advertising budget within search. But if you have a larger search volume, that subsequent ability to spend around that does open up a few different opportunities around targeting and creating custom audiences to pursue with the extra money behind it. And so in that respect, it's sort of like you're doubly going after that particular person in a channel where you know there's a lot of intent, because as Sally mentioned, search itself represents a lot of intent from a donor.
And I was going to follow up on Tom's question. Also, I didn't know if any of the other participants, not just the panel, if anybody else has found any, seen anything with their Google grants that they would want to mention.
If I were a Zoom ninja, I would quickly create a Zoom poll and push it out to everyone. And the time that it would take me to do that, we may run out. But please, folks, type in the chat or even unmute yourself if you wish to. If your organization has a Google grant, let us know. All right. All right, so Ricky said much of this is over her non-tech head. Can you guys just define the Google grant?
Sure. I can take that one, Dan. So as a nonprofit organization, Google offers a nonprofit bonus, basically, of $10,000 a month that you can spend in Google search. So you have to apply for it and qualify, but it's basically like a grant that Google gives to nonprofits to help them boost their spend budgets on the search side. And there are some parameters around it to make sure that it's being used correctly, but it's a nice supplement to your paid search or your media plan.
And if you don't have a paid media plan yet, it can be the foundational building block in it.
Absolutely, yeah. So if your organization hasn't applied for it, I definitely recommend checking that out and applying for those funds, because it's basically free money.
And I would say too, what we see on a lot of our clients, that when we get a client that's relatively small and we see them grow over time, they typically start out as a Google Ad Grant client, where we help them do that spending and manage that SEO and a little bit more on that search side. But typically, as a foundational starting point, we see a lot of work start there, and good things typically happen.
That's great. I think what we'll do in the follow-up email and summary of this webinar is we'll include a link to Google Grant and then some recent advice and literature from Media Cause or other organizations that have a good resource for how to apply for and use a Google Grant. Anyone else who has a question, please feel free to type it in the chat. While we're waiting, kind of acknowledging, that talking about kind of advertising and paid search is a 201 level class maybe. So what if an organization is starting from scratch on building a digital program, and maybe they get something and to send out some emails, and they get something that kind of helps them spiff up their donation form? What would you say sort of the maybe top 3 basic things to do would be?
Maybe we sped too quickly through it, but I would say some of the things would be that data measurement piece as a foundational piece, but also the strong user experience, that donor journey. It's not just about getting people to the donation form; it's getting them to the thank you page, right? So if that's the goal, make sure that you really prioritize that UX. And I would add too, as a starting point, it's an opportunity to do testing and to start, which growing a digital program over time demands a lot of robust testing. But that would be a great place to start, that testing dynamic. But as far as the email, and this is where I think you can apply a lot of those hyper segmented strategies. This is where I think where we see kind of things, and I imagine the Raise Heck folks see, is where the tech falls down, where we can't put the segments together that we would have otherwise wanted. And so if you know that segmentation is going to have to be a priority in terms of your email outbound, that would be one of those things to consider when you evaluate your tech, right? So like if it's easy enough for you to make sure you can serve the right messages to the right people and make the right ask. That's another important point. Make sure you ask people who are, have the appropriate capacity for the donation ask array that you lay out. And so those kinds of things I think are important ideas to think about as it relates to your tech stack, for sure.
For sure. And if you buy your email marketing tool from some worms, you should, because they're great at segmentation. My kids didn't get that joke when I told it to them earlier, so I hope it resonates a little more here. But since you're muted, I can't hear the raucous laughter that I'm sure is echoing in your home offices. I'd say I'd like to share, something that when I used to work directly with the nonprofit, a very wise aphorism that I heard was, the surest way to not get any donations is not to ask for them. So if you are just starting out from scratch in the digital channel, whether you've decided it's time or whether some of your other channels have dried up, I encourage you, don't shy away from fundraising. And like Dan and Nicola told us earlier, keep fundraising, definitely pay attention to the moment, but do kind of make your case, your value proposition for why your mission is so important, and use your digital tools to bring the immediacy of your mission to people. All right, if anyone has one more question, please feel free to ask it before we finish and wrap up. Now I can't see the chat again, so if you guys see anything come through, please let me know.
I think that's it.
All right. Well, we want to thank all of you for coming and sharing an hour of your Thursday with us. Charlotte and I would like to thank Media Cause for agreeing to do this webinar with us. We want to encourage you to visit their website. They provide a lot of excellent services, and as you can see, they're very knowledgeable and pleasant people to work with. Please visit us at raiseheck.com as well. We'd love to help you raise some heck. So thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.